I had been driving for hours on a deserted road, surrounded by the disturbing silence of the night, when the rain began to fall. The heavy drops mixed with the dim glow of the headlights, making the landscape even more sinister and claustrophobic. My plan was simple: to reach the city before dawn, but exhaustion began to weigh on my eyes. The road seemed endless until, suddenly, my headlights illuminated an old, weathered sign indicating a hotel 2 kilometers away. Without thinking much, I decided to follow the directions. A few minutes later, I spotted the building. It was an old, poorly maintained structure with a sign flickering precariously. Accommodation, rooms available. The image was not inviting, but my tired body offered no other option. I parked, grabbed my backpack, and entered the hotel. The smell of mold was the first thing that hit me as I crossed the door. The lobby was small, dimly lit, and decorated with furniture that looked like it came from another era, with faded upholstery and a strange layer of dust on the surfaces. At the counter, a thin, pale man watched me with attentive, restless eyes. Despite his peculiar appearance, he was polite, handing me the key to room 9 with a forced smile. In a hurry, he murmured a "good night," and quickly diverted his gaze, as if he wanted to end the interaction. Without thinking much, I climbed the creaky stairs and walked down the narrow corridor that would lead me to my room. The walls were yellowed, covered with peeling wallpaper, and each step I took made the floor creak uncomfortably. Something about the atmosphere made me tense, but exhaustion seemed to overpower any strange feelings. When I reached the room, I felt a chill run down my spine even before stepping inside. As soon as I opened the door, the air seemed colder than in the hallway, even with the windows tightly shut. The bed, as old as the rest of the place, had a sunken mattress that screamed discomfort, but at that moment, it seemed enough. I left my backpack by the side, took a quick shower in the lukewarm water that barely managed to chase away the chill in the air, and threw myself on the bed. I turned off the light, but sleep didn't come quickly. The feeling of being watched was intense, as if something or someone was there with me, hidden in the darkness of the room. I convinced myself it was just paranoia. After all, such a strange place could certainly mess with any tired mind. But even so, the discomfort didn't disappear. I woke up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. A muffled, unsettling sound echoed through the room, coming directly from the closet. It was a soft creak, as if the door was being slowly opened. My mind tried to find rational explanations. Maybe it was the wind or the old building, whose walls seemed to hold the secrets of years of abandonment. With heavy breathing, I forced myself to get up. I grabbed my phone to light up the room, and with hesitant steps I approached the closet. The door was slightly ajar, a sight that made me even more alert. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and yanked the door open all at once. Inside, only clothes hung on the hangers, swaying as if someone had touched them just seconds before. A chill ran down my spine as I slammed the door shut and went back to bed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Even so, the feeling of not being alone lingered, hanging over me like an invisible shadow. As I tried to calm down, a new sound made its presence known. There were footsteps in the hallway, heavy and slow, as if someone were walking with wet boots. Each step seemed to echo directly in my nerves. Unable to resist, I ran to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued, now coming from above, from the ceiling. My heart felt like it was about to leap out of my chest when I heard something even more disturbing. A scratching sound, like nails dragging across the wood outside my door. My instincts told me to open and face whatever it was, but an irrational fear kept me paralyzed. I remained there, motionless, listening as the scratching intensified and slowly transformed into banging, louder and more violent each time. It was as if something was demanding to enter, forcing its presence into that dark room. Then suddenly the banging stopped. The silence that followed was almost more disturbing than the sounds before. For a few seconds I thought it was over, but then Something new made me freeze. Through the small crack beneath the door, a shadow moved, sinuous and slow, casting distorted shapes against the dim light of the hallway. It wasn't an ordinary shadow. It seemed alive, pulsating, as if it had consciousness. My breath caught in my throat, barely escaping, and all I could do was watch, trying to understand what was happening. The shadow remained there for long seconds before disappearing into the same terrifying silence it had brought with it. My courage quickly ran out. On impulse, I grabbed my backpack and decided I needed to leave that place immediately before something worse happened. When I opened the door to the room, the hallway stretched out empty and silent, but there was something wrong, something I couldn't explain. The air seemed heavier, almost suffocating, as if an invisible presence were watching me closely. As I hurried toward the reception, the environment around me seemed distorted. The hotel sign, which had been flickering intermittently before, now buzzed frantically, casting strange shadows on the outside walls. When I finally reached the counter, I found it completely empty. I called out for the receptionist repeatedly, but the only response I received was the echo of my words in that eerily vacant space. A chill ran through my body, and without thinking twice, I ran outside, determined to escape. When I reached my car, the feeling of being watched still lingered. But my only concern was leaving that place as quickly as possible. As I turned the key in the ignition, I couldn't resist looking back toward the hotel. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Most of the interior lights were off, but in the window of the room I had been in just moments before, a motionless silhouette stared back at me. The face was impossible to distinguish, but the outline of the figure was unmistakable. I hit the accelerator, my heart racing as I sped away on the dark, wet road. With each kilometer I left behind, the feeling of relief was overshadowed by an increasing unease. Whatever that place was, something told me I should have never stopped there. Hours later, with the sun rising on the horizon, I stopped at a small gas station to fuel up and catch my breath. The attendant, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, noticed my disturbed expression and asked if something had happened. I decided to tell him about the hotel, hoping for some kind of explanation for the events of the night. As soon as I mentioned the name of the place, his expression changed completely, becoming dark. He interrupted me, saying, "That place? That doesn't make sense. It was shut down years ago, after a guest was found dead in room 9. His words echoed in my mind, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I drove the rest of the way in silence, trying to forget. But to this day, I avoid roadside motels. I learned there are doors that should never be opened, and memories that should never be revived. Scary stories about hotels always seemed exaggerated to me, almost like cliches from horror movies. However, one rainy night completely changed my perception. I had been driving for hours, exhausted and with little patience, when I spotted a small roadside hotel. The place was modest, with a peeling facade and a neon sign flickering intermittently. At the reception, a gray-haired lady greeted me. She seemed friendly, but there was something unusual in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. The lobby had a strong smell of mildew and an uncomfortable silence, as if the very environment was holding some secret. Still, exhaustion won out. I accepted room 16, took the key, and walked down a dimly lit corridor where the fluorescent lights flickered as if they were about to go out at any moment. When I opened the door to the room, an inexplicable feeling washed over me. The space was simple, but there was something disturbing in the air, something that made every cell in my body stay alert. The yellow wallpaper was faded and stained in a peculiar way, as if time had marked its memories there. A large mirror, taller than usual, occupied most of the wall opposite the bed, and its presence was unsettling. I tried to ignore it all, convincing myself it was just accumulated fatigue. After a quick warm shower, I lay down, trying to relax. That's when a series of sounds made me freeze. Footsteps. They were coming from the hallway, slow and deliberate, stopping right in front of my door. The sound stopped abruptly, but my heart kept racing. I stayed still, holding my breath as I tried to hear something else. An absolute silence took over the space, but the feeling that I was not alone lingered. Was it my mind playing tricks on me? The room seemed different, as if the darkness had a life of its own, swallowing every detail my eyes tried to capture. Even without more noises, the tension kept rising. Something was deeply wrong with that hotel, and every passing second made me question whether I should have ignored that strange initial chill. Around 2 a.m, I woke up with an inexplicable discomfort, as if an invisible presence was in the room with me. The air felt colder, heavier, and my breath echoed in the absolute silence. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening, but everything seemed in place. It was then that my gaze fixed on the mirror. Something was wrong. Lying on the bed, I noticed that my reflection wasn't synchronized with me. Every movement I made was followed by a slight, but noticeable delay. At first, I thought it was fatigue distorting my perception, but when I sat up on the bed, the reflection remained motionless. My heart raced, and a wave of terror washed over me. Without thinking much, I got up and turned the mirror against the wall. That object seemed to pulse with something that shouldn't be there, but I hoped moving it out of my sight would bring relief. However, the tranquility was short-lived. While I tried to go back to sleep, something even stranger happened. Whispers. They started low, almost imperceptible, but quickly took form, as if distinct voices were speaking simultaneously. They seemed to come from within the walls, a disordered symphony of incomprehensible words that made me shiver from head to toe. I tried to turn on my phone's flashlight to ward off the fear and light up the room, but to my horror, the battery was completely drained. I was sure it was at 50% when I arrived. The environment seemed to conspire against me. The stains on the walls, which had been random before, now took shapes that resembled faces, figures that seemed to watch and smile at me in a distorted way. The room felt suffocating, and every second seemed to last an eternity. The air became denser, and my own desperation made my heart beat faster. I remained motionless, trying to organize my thoughts and decide what to do, but everything in the environment seemed to trap me there. The idea of running away crossed my mind, but the darkness of the hallway and whatever was out there seemed equally threatening. Every sound, every shadow, every detail in that room reinforced one undeniable truth. Something didn't want me to leave. My instinct screamed that that night wouldn't end well if I stayed, but my courage seemed abandoned, lost in that sea of uncertainty and fear. The most terrifying part happened just before dawn. I woke up to a high-pitched sound, almost imperceptible, but it quickly intensified. It was a strange creaking, coming from the mirror I had turned against the wall. It seemed like something was scratching from the other side, trying to break through. I remained paralyzed, caught between fear and disbelief, as the sound grew louder. Suddenly, without warning, the mirror fell off the wall, shattering into countless pieces on the floor. My breath stopped as I looked at the scattered shards and noticed something impossible. In the reflection of the pieces, there was a tall, thin figure with glowing, inhuman eyes, standing beside my bed. I screamed with all the strength I had, leapt out of bed in panic, and ran out of the room without looking back. My things were left behind. At that moment, all that mattered was getting out of that cursed place. The next day, still shaken and sleep-deprived, I decided to return to the hotel with the police. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words seemed insufficient to describe the terror I had felt. When we arrived, my heart sank even further. The hotel was completely abandoned. The windows were broken, the interior covered in dust and cobwebs, as if no one had stepped inside for years. Room 16 was empty with old, decaying furniture, but there was no sign of mirror shards or the terror from the previous night. I asked about the lady at the reception, but the officers just stared at me, confused. It was as if she had never existed. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what was real and what wasn't, while the fear seemed to grow even stronger inside me. Since that night, an unsettling feeling follows me whenever I pass by roadside hotels. It's as if something has changed in me, an invisible scar left by that experience. I avoid mirrors whenever possible. Just looking at one, I feel like something is lurking, watching, waiting. I don't know what that figure in the mirror was, but I'm certain it doesn't belong to this world. And even now, as I tell this story, I feel like it's still there, in that hotel, waiting for the next visitor who dares cross the threshold of room 16 and face the reflection of the unknown.